call a genius? Usually it's someone with great knowledge, a polymath, and or someone who excelled in a specific subject or even across many. This could be someone like Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Mozart, Shakespeare, etc. But how has the term genius risen and developed over the centuries, and how has it been used to label someone as a genius? The theme of this podcast, by the way, my first episode, is to present the development of the term genius and later show specific examples of the work of artists we would call geniuses. The time frame with which I kick off is the French Classicism. Now, ever since I talk about the genius, a question and dichotomy arose. Is being genius a matter of talent or skill? Of course, throughout the history of literature, general characteristics emerged regarding the genius, like fantasy, gift of free association, originality, intuition, the premonition about evolution, invention like invention and recombination of known facts, productivity that exceeds the universal measure, and inspiration. Sources of inspiration could be transcendental entities or exceptional cognitive skills. Jean-Alexandre Perrin describes in his article Genius as Commonplace in Early Modern France. The genius is someone who stands out from the common collective, and his originality and ideas are contradictory. The genius displays originality and ideas that don't always find consent, but its existence finds distinction and brilliance. So finally, the genius ends up being a font of innovation and originality. Now, let's look at the French Classicism, which unfolded under the impact of the antique epoch when the ideal state of nature first emerged. With the passing of time and historical development, the loss of this original state legitimized the commandment of imitating nature by imitating antique poetry. That, of course, became a restriction, and literary creativity was found through subtle linguistic expression. The imitative skill marked the genius now. However, modern literature, the libertines, refused to imitate antiquity and introduced a new perception of the term genius. For them, genius is a topos that gives new currency to old commonplaces and creates new meaning and value for commonality. So, ancient examples are reintroduced in new forms. Now, the modern demands free handling of antique tradition. The spokesman of this movement is Charles Perrault, who created the beau relatif. In this beau relatif, the original ideals shine under a different light due to the knowledge and historical reflection. The antique aesthetic is relativized through contemporary aesthetic interpretation. Perrault allows the genius to imitate ideal beauty, but this contemporary beauty ideal is inimitable because it doesn't use prototypes. That leads from imitation over to invention. Therefore, Perrault and Fontanelle tried to establish new literary forms, fables, fairy tales, short stories, and novels. This process reduced poetry's claim to truth, which was the main characteristic of antique literature. Now, those forms were free from regulations. The language metric, unbounded and open for new expressions. Creativity could present itself as fictionality around literature. Throughout this dispute, the term genius has won a new meaning. Le génie takes the place of antique authority. He has talent and natural skills. But this antique role model replacement ignites a new discussion about the genius in France, England, and Germany. Observing Jean-Baptiste Dubut and his idea about the genius, he describes him as a person who has by nature the skill to do some things better than others, but achieves perfection through studying. For him, talent exists, but excellence must be attained. On the other hand, Diderot explains that genius is created by nature and constitutes itself by nature. Instead of striving to imitate, the genius wants to explore, the spirit observer who rethinks the significant thought of creation. At this point, Diderot tries to keep art and science connected. Regarding the aesthetic ideal, Diderot says that the genius consciously violates the conventional concept of beauty, counterposes its subjectivity to it, and can even become a monster. Nicolas Chamfort underlines the unifying power of the genius, calling him the spirit of the nation. He rearranges the hierarchies of political power, prompting the idea that the influence of genius is more effective than the imposition of power through force. Here we can sense an underlying danger of glorifying the genius because it can cause upheavals and revolutions in difficult times. Closing here with the French literati, we look at the views of Spinoza, a reflection of the term of the genius in England, and Klopstock. Starting with Spinoza. For Spinoza, nature has its creative power. The link between beauty and the absolute, divine, falls away. The aesthetic becomes an independent discipline. There is no divine instance. It's the task of the individual to recognize beauty and express it as artistic genius. English sensualism somehow finds its roots in Spinoza's thought. The English reception of the term genius is open to natural science and person oriented. Also emphasized is nature, the natural genius, in distinction to the educational genius introduced by Joseph Addison. Very often the word discovery comes up, the genius who sets off for new shores. Klopstock gives a paradigm of the genius and describes him as a person who has insight into the correlations in nature. The feelings inside this recognizing subject, like enthusiasm, sublimity, and passion, must be processed. Therefore, a linguistic expansion is needed in prose and poesy, according to Enlightenment. Prose must be purposely and comprehensibly. In poesy, the poet has the freedom to express his emotional pathos. The great chosen language by the poet is inspired by nature and God. At this point, Klopstock raises the poet to the rank of the prophet. Here we can recognize a self-promotion to the creator with the aura of a prophet. Now, overviewing the 19th century in the fields of art theory, aesthetics, medicine, and psychology, they tend to approach the genius differently. They associate the genius with madness. Genius doesn't depend on divine inspiration. It manifests through an intensive sense of identity in connection to the whole of nature. As Herder supports, the individual genius is part of nature. Herder also wishes to create an original, genuine language in which genius can flourish. He connects language with nature. Looking at Goethe's perception of a genius, he soon gives up his godlike genius and speaks of a genius who solely directs his creativity. It creates out of itself and reflects itself. Goethe's geniality was already undeniable during his lifetime. Contemporaries recognized his potential as a genius. Schiller said about him, Goethe, being once in my path, reminds me very often that destiny treated me cruelly. How easy was his genius carried from destiny, and how much must I fight till this last minute. At this point, I will continue with work examples from writers and how the genius is there reflected. I will start with Goethe, who was already regarded when he lived as a genius, as I've mentioned. In The Sorrows of Young Werther, Goethe displays his concept of a genius in which the artist refrains from any expression because he is enough. For this, I will quote some parts of The Sorrows of Young Werther. I will start with the letter of May 17th. Good heavens! Did then a single power of my soul remain unexercised? In her presence could I not display to its full extent that mysterious feeling with which my heart embraces nature? Was not our intercourse a perpetual web of the finest emotions, of the keenest wit, the varieties of which, even in their very eccentricity, bore the stamp of genius? So we see here the main theme is genius versus reception of nature. Um, Werther, who is in love, has difficulties embracing nature and expressing it adequately in a genius way. This brings Goethe's statement that a genius solely directs his creativity under the twilight. In this part, the two questions arise. Does the genius really not need the nature? And how natural are the feelings since they can't be adequately expressed? Now, I continue to quote from the letter of July 24th. I never felt happier, I never understood nature better, even down to the veriest stem of smallest blade of grass, and yet I am unable to express myself. My powers of execution are so weak. Everything seems to swim and float before me, so that I cannot make a clear, bold outline. But I fancy I should succeed better if I had some clay or wax to model. I shall try if this state of mind continues much longer, and will take to modeling if I only need Tao. Now, here the main theme is genius versus individual expression. In this excerpt, Werther understands nature completely but has problems expressing this nature with proper words, which shouldn't be actually be difficult for a genius. So, words aren't enough, and the genius needs another medium. So that's for the sorrows of young Werther. In Wilhelm Meister, Goethe detaches creativity from genius. Activity and productivity, not genius, are the characteristics of creativity. This mindset of Goethe later finds its expression in realism with Balzac, Flaubert, etc. As for Romanticism, Goethe characterized it as a disease in art since it celebrated the genius cult. Hoffmann describes it to the point that geniality is more a cause than a talent. The power of imagination gets lost in fantasy and deforms into the grotesque. Everything is allowed to the genius, expansion of consciousness, ecstatic orgies, and drugs. The anthropologist Cesare Lombroso traces genius back to a pathological consciousness. He sees the artist as a paradigm of a sick, sensitive poet who can decode nature's secrets, correlations, and messages. Furthermore, in his research on Dostoevsky's work, Lombroso incorporates epilepsy into his concept of genius. Genius has been masked as epilepsy and madness because since antiquity there has been a relation between genius and insanity. The genius cult discourse continues in decadence, new romanticism, and expressionism. But parallel to this, a series of medical, psychological, and sociological studies are conducted, so we can note that the genius discussion is not only in the field of literature but has been transferred to the political area. Making a connection between genius and psychology, we can consider Nietzsche as an example. Nietzsche's geniality, self-glorification, and the thought of genius run through his work. Nietzsche himself experienced a mental breakdown. Later, he was diagnosed with insanity due to tertiary syphilis. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche rises himself over genius figures like Goethe and Shakespeare. He states about them, they wouldn't know how to breathe in the realm of the passion and the great thought of his Zarathustra. He goes further and sees himself as the greatest genius of all time. There is no equal creative spirit in human history. He's convinced. His term Dionysian is his most extraordinary deed, and the rest of human action seems poor and limited. His explanation of the Dionysian is that he seeks a hero who, after declination, tries to rise through his will to live. And that is only accomplished through true Dionysian art because it's the art of affirmation. So, as for Nietzsche, I will mention two works from him. The first one is Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and the second, Ecce Homo. I will start with Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Here Nietzsche establishes a dichotomic metaphor. The dragon is the imitation, tradition, and the lion is the genius. I start to quote. Though short is the great dragon called, but the spirit of the lion saith, I will. The values of 1,000 years glitter on the scales, thus speaketh the mightiest of all dragons. All the values of things glitter on me. To create new values that even the lion cannot yet accomplish, but to create itself freedom for new creating, that can the mind of the lion do. So for Nietzsche here, the genius creates a new world, a better one. How he did. I continue to quote from Zarathustra: this world, the eternally imperfect and eternal contradictions image, and imperfect image, an intoxicating joy to its imperfect creator. Thus did the world once seem to me. Ah, ye brethren, that God whom I created was human work and human madness like all the gods. Now, I will go now to Ecce Homo. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche goes so far and expresses an extreme self-glorification. There are 3 chapters with following titles. The first one, Why I Am So Wise. The second, Why I Am So Clever. And the third, Why I Write Such Excellent Books. I continue to quote Nietzsche. My nostrils are more sensitive than those of any man that has lived yet. I am too inquisitive, too incredulous, too high-spirited to be satisfied with such a palpably clumsy solution of things. Well, so much for Nietzsche's self-glorification, and let's go from Europe to the other side of the Atlantic and observing Edgar Allan Poe. Now, Edgar Allan Poe was the central figure in Romanticism and Gothic fiction in the USA. Indeed, he left his mark and influenced Gothic horror fiction further up to the present day. His death remains mysterious. It was speculated that it possibly was caused by hypoglycemia, suicide due to depression, and an overdose of laudanum. I will quote from 2 works. The first is Berenice, and the second is The Telltale Heart from Edgar Allan Poe. In Berenice, Edgar Allan Poe depicts his creative genius within a combination of moral and physical revolution through disease. It's a combination of the field medicine and genius, which I've mentioned earlier. So I start to quote. Among the numerous train of maladies superinduced by the fatal and primary one which affected a revolution of so horrible a kind in the moral and physical being of my cousin, may be mentioned as the most distressing and obstinate in its nature, a species of epilepsy not unfrequently terminating in trance itself, trance very nearly resembling positive dissolution, and from which her manner of recovery was in most instances startlingly abrupt. In the meantime, my own disease, for I have been told that I should call it by no other appellation, my own disease then grew rapidly upon me, and assumed finally a monomaniac character of a novel and extraordinary form, hourly and momently gaining vigor, and at length obtaining over me the most incomprehensible ascendancy. So, furthermore, in this quoted excerpt, the term epilepsy is mentioned, which Cesare Lombroso also connected with the genius. Now let's go to the Telltale Heart. Here Poe's genius connects the divine with evil hell. I start to quote. It's true, yes, I have been ill, very ill, but why do you say that I have lost control over my mind? Why do you say that I am mad? Can you not see that I have full control of my mind? Is it not clear that I am not mad? Indeed, the illness only made my feelings, my senses stronger, more powerful. I heard sounds from heaven, and I heard sounds from hell. Now, going much further ahead in time, in the 1950s in America, the thought of genius was replaced by the term creativity. It isn't interesting to know where creativity originates, but how it is expressed. That brings us to today, when the focus lies on the way and medium of an artist's expression. Well, that's all I have to say about the genius. I hope you liked it and please feel free to comment. Till next time, bye!